Wex and I, we have not been back to Singapore for about 2 years now, and I feel that food is the one thing that really transports you. Even when you can't be physically back home, you can always cook yourself something that reminds you of home. Hi everyone, I'm Pamelia Chia, and you're here with me in my home in Daylesford, which is 1.5 hours away from Melbourne City. So the Singapore Global Network has asked me to answer some questions about my life and also to share with you a recipe from home. So let's get started. So the very first question is, how did you get started with cooking? To be honest, I started off loving baking first because, as a student, you don't really have that much money to buy like a whole duck or like a whole fish to cook at home. So I really started with like basic staple ingredients like butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and with that you can really create so many different things. And I only transitioned to cooking because I realized that my family didn't really like the baked goods that I was making because it was too sweet. So I started cooking gradually, and I realized that cooking was really a powerful way for me to connect with my family members. How did you fall in love with Singaporean cuisine and ingredients? When I was younger, my mom would cook a lot in her kitchen, and I found it really hard to learn from her because there's a lot of like agak-agak kind of cooking, and so I just wanted to stay away from that because it felt very imprecise. It felt really difficult to learn. And later on, when I became a chef, I started working at this place called Lollapalooza. At the time, my head chef, he was a very devout Buddhist, and so he would spend a lot of his time going on religious retreats in different countries like Chiang Mai, like Indonesia. And when he came back, he cooked like all kinds of amazing dishes, and it really expanded my mind on what Asian food was and what Asian ingredients could do. So I started working at Candlenut, and that was where I realized that Singaporean food is so laborious and that there is so much craft behind it. At the same time, my husband Wex started working in agriculture, and so he started growing a lot of local vegetables like roselle, like moringa, and I was like, I've never ever seen these ingredients at all in the supermarket, and the only place where you could find that was the wet markets. And so I started going back to the wet markets to kind of learn about these ingredients, and that was how Wet Market to Table was born. How has the move to Australia been? So we moved about 3 to 4 years ago because Wex wanted to do his Masters in Agriculture here in Australia, and so I felt that it was a good time for me to experience living abroad because when I was in school, I never went for any exchange programs or anything like that. So we lived for 3 years in Melbourne City, and recently we moved out here to Daylesford, which is in rural Victoria. So it has been an incredible journey and experience so far because I've never experienced so many things before living here. For example, eating with the seasons. I mean, seasons is not something that we have in Singapore. And also the proximity that you have to local producers and that connection to food that we experience here. I mean, it's really like a chef's dream or like a foodie's dream to be knowing where your food comes from, how it's grown, and to get access to such amazing produce. But definitely it wasn't all roses because I do feel homesick sometimes, and I used to grapple with it so much. There are not many Singaporean eateries here that have the same taste of home, and so that led me to a journey of cooking a lot, learning from my mom, learning from my mother-in-law how to make things that I've never even thought of making before. And so I make constant trips to the Asian grocer now to get Asian ingredients, and I stockpile them in my freezer just to make sure that I always have enough. I feel like living abroad gives you a newfound appreciation for what we have in Singapore, which is like abundant, affordable, well-cooked kind of food, So why start Singapore Noodles? So last year when COVID hit Australia, my hours as a chef was reduced and I started having a lot more free time. So I had always wanted to do something with Singaporean food to document it and to share it, and I felt like there was no better time than at that point. If I wasn't gonna do it, then I was never gonna do it. And so, I created Singapore Noodles as an online food repository. So it comprises recipes of traditional dishes, video tutorials on how to make certain things, as well as podcast conversations that I have with people whom I truly find are inspiring and are shaping our food culture in meaningful ways. What is seasonings? So Seasonings is a food publication that is focused on Singapore's festivals that I started under Singapore Noodles in collaboration with a local artist, Hafi. I really believe that good design is so crucial in getting our young Singaporeans interested in our cuisine, which they might find very old school or very traditional. And to me, festival food is very, very interesting because it's often the most intricate and the most elaborate kind of food. And it's also very symbolic because you only bring them out or start making them at certain points of the year. And the inspiration for that really comes from living in Australia and experiencing the seasons, which was when I realized that in Singapore we also have seasons that guide the way that we eat. For example, during Chinese New Year, you have pineapple tarts. We just experienced Dumpling Festival not too long ago. And then we have Deepavali, we have Hari Raya Haji, Hari Raya Puasa, Christmas. We really need to be proud of these festivals, which is so key to our Singaporean identity and such a big part of our heritage. So I feel like working on Singapore Noodles and on Seasonings, it really has given me a newfound understanding of what is there to celebrate about being Singaporean. I feel like I became even more Singaporean since living abroad. The last question is, what are you cooking? Now we're in winter and the days are really cold and really short. And so the thing that I actually feel like eating the most is mee soto. And for those of you who don't know, it's like a Malay chicken noodle soup dish. Sometimes they have it with pressed rice instead. I feel that the combination of the rempah, the spices, the comforting nature of chicken soup just reminds me of home. So the very first step in making a mee soto is preparing a rempah. So a rempah is basically a spice paste and it starts with red onion. So here I have some cut up red onion. I've also used some kitchen scraps. We have some peeled garlic and some peeled and cut ginger that I've bought from the Asian grocer. We also have some galangal. So for those of you who have never seen galangal before, it basically is a harder, pinker version of ginger. So we'll also need some lemongrass. So what I'm doing is I'm actually cutting up the white part of the lemongrass, which has the most flavor. So once we have that, we move on to turmeric. So when you work with turmeric, just be very, very careful because the orange pigment in the root can really stain everything. So you just want to remove the skin with a teaspoon, and then after you peel it, you can cut it into small pieces for your rempah. So now that we have all the ingredients, we're going to put them into a blender. So start with red onion and garlic, which are ingredients that have a lot of moisture in them, so it helps the blender blend smoothly. And then you want to add all of the rest of the ingredients that have more fiber in them. So once everything is in, you can cover the blender and blend it until everything is smooth. So at this stage, if you are having difficulty blending the paste, you can add some water, but not too much. So once in a while, you want to scrape down the sides of the rempah so that it blends properly and evenly. So we also want to add some cashew nuts. If you live in Singapore or if you have access to candle nuts, you can use that. But using cashew nuts produces the very same effect. Now you have a rempah that is ready for frying. Apart from the rempah, we'll also need cinnamon stick, some bay leaves. Now these are Indonesian bay leaves that are different from Western bay leaves. They have a different aroma and they look different as well. But if you can't find the Indonesian bay leaves, you can just use regular bay leaves if you like. We'll also need some cloves, some cardamom, some star anise, and we'll also need a chicken, which is a very important part of this recipe. So you want to cut down one side of the backbone to open up the chicken, and then now you want to cut through the breast so that you split the chicken into two pieces. I like using a pair of kitchen scissors for this, but you can also use a knife or a Chinese chopper. So now you want to heat some oil in a stock pot, and then you want to add your spices as well as the parts of the lemongrass that we did not use in the rempah. So fry this for a few minutes before adding your rempah. And you just want to stir fry the rempah, making sure that it doesn't burn. And now we're going to add some spices in the form of coriander powder and some cumin powder. And we just want to toast them through for another few minutes. And now we add the 2 halves of the chicken. So this is why we had to cut the chicken open. It reduces the amount of water that you actually need to submerge the chicken. So I normally like to rinse out my blender jug with some water just to get all of the spice paste out before pouring it into the pot. So you want to top up with sufficient liquid to cover the chicken completely. Now we're going to bring this to a boil and then we'll season it to taste with salt. So at this point, I also like adding some ground white pepper to taste. So allow this to simmer for about 2 to 3 hours or until the chicken is completely tender. So when the chicken is done, it should completely fall off the bone. It should be that tender, and this is absolutely perfect. So use a pair of tongs or a sieve to remove all the spices as well as the chicken from the soup. So once the chicken has cooled down enough for you to handle, you can actually pick apart the chicken. And what I really like about using a whole chicken is that you get all the great bits like the cartilage and also the skin. So I'll pick everything and I'll store them in takeaways for the next day when I assemble the mee soto. For any dish that uses fried shallots or fried onions, I really like to make my own because it tastes so much fresher and it's so easy to make. So all you have to do is put your sliced onions in a pan and add enough oil to almost cover the onions. So you just want to set it on high heat, and I like using high heat because I feel that the onions brown quicker and they retain a lot of their sweetness. So when it's almost the color that you like, take it off the heat because it will continue cooking, and you just want to pass it through a sieve. So the oil you can use for frying or deep frying, and for the onions we will keep and we'll use them in our bergedils and also to garnish the mee soto. And now we can move on to the next component, which is preparing the bergedils. So for the bergedils, I'm using some local potatoes. So they normally sell it in like a huge bag of like 5 or 10 kilos. So they are usually caked in soil. So the very first thing I do is to scrub them really well with a scourer. And I'll place them in a pot and fill it up with water. To that, I'm gonna add some salt, some Indonesian bay leaves, and bring that up to a boil. So after about 20 minutes, test it with a knife and it should be completely tender. So remove that from the pot and just let them cool down until they're cool enough to handle. So now what we're gonna do is remove the skins. I like using a butter knife for this. I feel like this works a lot better when the potatoes are still warm, so you don't want to let them cool completely, and you just want to remove any trace of skin. And then to the peeled potatoes, I'm adding some chopped coriander and chopped Chinese celery. If you can't find Chinese celery, you can use the stems of coriander. And now I'm just using my hands to blend everything together, season it to taste with salt. And we're gonna add some homemade fried onions, combine everything well, and you just want to form it into small patties. After you shape them into balls, just lightly flatten them and store them in your fridge or until you're ready to fry the bergedils. So the next day, the very first thing that you want to get on is a pot of hot water, and we're gonna use this to blanch bean sprouts. So using a sieve, quickly lower the bean sprouts into the water and just cook it for about 1 minute and then drain it and set it aside. In the same water, you're going to cook some Hokkien noodles or yellow noodles, and because this is a fresh product, it just takes about 1 minute to cook. If you can't find this ingredient, you can just use bihun or kway teow. The next thing that goes into this pot is bihun, so you can just drop that right in. And once it rehydrates and becomes tender, you can pour it out into a colander and let that cool while you prepare the other ingredients. So now for the eggs, bring a small pot of water to a boil. You just want to drop the eggs in and cook it for about 6 minutes. So my preference for the egg is for it to be soft-centered. So I've cooked these eggs for about 6 minutes. But if you want a firmer set, just like what you get at hawker centers, you can go longer, like maybe 7 minutes. Now we're gonna start frying the bergedils. So crack some eggs into a bowl, beat that up, and that is basically your egg wash. So coat the bergedils in the egg and drop them into hot oil. You can be pretty generous on the egg coating because what you get is these like really nice frilly edges that are really delicious to eat. So you just want to fry the bergedils until they turn golden brown, and then lift them out of the wok and transfer them onto paper towels to drain.